The crowd inside the luxury business auction went silent when a struggling single father raised his hand and bought an old, forgotten garage for only $1,000. Everyone laughed when the billionaire CEO who owned the property called it a worthless piece of junk and warned him he was wasting his money. The single dad, carrying years of financial pressure and a dream his daughter believed in, walked away with a broken-looking building nobody wanted. But 6 months later, the same people who mocked him were standing outside that garage in complete disbelief. The CEO thought he sold him an empty space, but he never knew what was hidden inside. And when the truth finally came out, the entire business world changed forever. The auction hall was filled with wealthy investors, business owners, and people who had spent their lives buying valuable properties. Expensive suits, luxury watches, and confident voices filled the room as everyone waited for the next big opportunity to appear. Nobody expected the next item on the list to create a moment everyone would remember. Property number 47, the auctioneer announced. An old commercial garage located on the East Side District. Starting bid, $500. A few people glanced at the screen and immediately looked away. A small laugh came from the front row. $500? They should pay someone to take that place away, one investor joked. The room laughed. Standing near the back was Daniel Carter, a single father who had spent years fighting battles nobody in that room knew about. He wasn't wearing a designer suit. He wasn't carrying a team of advisors. He stood there in a simple jacket, holding a folder filled with notes he had carefully prepared. To everyone else, he looked like someone who didn't belong. But Daniel wasn't there to impress anyone. He was there because he needed a chance. After losing his job months earlier, Daniel had struggled to keep everything together. Every decision he made was about his daughter, Emma. He didn't want her to grow up watching him give up. He wanted to show her that even when life pushed someone down, they could still stand back up. When the bidding started, nobody moved. The auctioneer looked around. Any offers? Daniel slowly raised his hand. $1,000. The room became quiet for a second. Then the laughter returned. A billionaire CEO, sitting in the front row, turned around. Marcus Vail was known as one of the most successful businessmen in the country. His company owned buildings, factories, and technology firms around the world. He looked at Daniel and smiled. "You're serious?" Marcus asked. Daniel nodded. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You're about to spend your savings on a garage that has been empty for years." A few people smiled. "I believe every property has potential." Marcus laughed softly. "That garage has no potential. It's old, damaged, and forgotten. Even my company couldn't find a use for it." The words hit harder because everyone heard them. Daniel felt the eyes of the entire room on him. For a moment, he thought about lowering his hand. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe everyone in the room was right. Maybe he was making another mistake. But then he remembered Emma's face that morning when she told him, "Dad, maybe this is the thing that changes everything." So Daniel kept his hand raised. The auctioneer looked surprised. Going once. Nobody else bid. Going twice. Marcus shook his head, almost amused. This man just bought himself a problem. The final hammer came down. Sold for $1,000. The room moved on immediately. People returned to their conversations. Investors started discussing real deals. Nobody cared about the single father who had just purchased an abandoned garage. Except Daniel. He walked forward and received the old keys. They were scratched, cold, and looked like they had been forgotten for years. Marcus approached him before leaving. Maybe not, but sometimes people miss value because they stop looking. For the first time, Marcus looked slightly interested. Then he smiled. "Good luck with your garage." Daniel watched the CEO walk away. He didn't know it yet, but those words would come back to Marcus months later. Outside the auction building, Daniel sat in his car holding the keys. He looked at the address written on the paperwork. A place nobody wanted, a place that had been ignored for years. But something about it felt different. When Daniel finally arrived at the garage later that day, he expected to see exactly what everyone described. Old walls, broken equipment, dust covering everything. And it was exactly that. But as he stepped inside, something caught his attention. On the far wall, hidden beneath layers of dirt and old boards, there was a small mark carved into the surface. A symbol. one he had never seen before. Daniel moved closer, and for the first time, he wondered if Marcus Vale had really sold him a worthless garage. The first week after buying the garage was nothing like Daniel imagined. He thought the hardest part would be fixing the place, but he quickly realized the real challenge was convincing himself that he had not made a terrible mistake. Every morning before sunrise, Daniel arrived at the old building with a toolbox in one hand and a list of repairs in the other. The roof leaked, the electrical system was outdated, and half of the equipment left behind was useless. The garage looked less like an opportunity and more like a reminder of everything that could go wrong. People in the neighborhood noticed what he was doing. Some felt sorry for him. Others laughed. "Still working on that old place?" one man asked as Daniel carried broken materials outside. Daniel forced a smile. "Someone has to give it a chance." The man shook his head. "Your money would have been better spent somewhere else." Those words followed Daniel all day, because deep down, he had the same fear. What if everyone was right? At night, after putting Emma to bed, Daniel would sit at the kitchen table surrounded by bills, repair estimates, and the old property documents. He tried to find something that proved he made the right decision. But every page told the same story. The garage had been abandoned for years. No successful business had ever operated there. No investor wanted it. No one believed it had value. The only person who believed in it was the man who could barely afford to own it. One afternoon, Daniel received a call from an unexpected person. It was Marcus Vale. The billionaire CEO's voice was calm and confident. "I heard you started repairs." Daniel looked around the damaged garage. "Yes." Marcus paused. "You're actually serious about keeping that place?" Daniel tightened his grip on the phone. "I didn't buy to leave it empty." A small laugh came from Marcus. "You remind me of people who chase dreams without seeing reality." Daniel stayed silent. Then Marcus continued. "I'll make you an offer. A fair one." Daniel frowned. "What kind of offer?" "I'll buy the garage back from you. You make a profit, and you can move on." For a moment, Daniel looked around the building. The broken walls, the old machines, the place everyone said was worthless. A part of him wanted to accept. A quick profit would help him pay his bills. It would remove the pressure. It would make life easier. But something stopped him. "Why do you want it back?" The line became quiet, just for a second. Then Marcus answered, "Because I made a mistake selling it." Daniel noticed something strange. Marcus had never sounded uncertain before. But now, there was hesitation. "I'll think about it," Daniel said. After ending the call, Daniel stood alone inside the garage. Why would a billionaire suddenly care about an abandoned building? That question stayed in his mind. Over the next few days, Daniel started searching deeper into the property history. He visited old records offices, looked through archived documents, and studied every detail about the garage. That was when he discovered something strange. The garage had changed owners several times, but every owner kept it for only a short period before selling it. Nobody explained why. Nobody mentioned repairs. Nobody mentioned financial problems. They simply walked away, like they were trying to escape something. Daniel looked at the documents again. There was one name that appeared repeatedly in the records. A company connected to Marcus Vale. The same company Marcus claimed had no interest in the garage. Daniel felt a chill. Why would a billionaire company once own a useless garage? And why was Marcus suddenly trying to buy it back? That evening, while cleaning a forgotten corner of the building, Daniel noticed something behind a damaged wall panel. The same strange symbol he had seen before. But this time, underneath it, there was a small metal edge hidden behind the wood. Daniel removed the panel carefully. Behind it was a narrow space that didn't appear on any building plan. His heart started beating faster. He reached inside and touched something covered in dust. A small locked container. Daniel pulled it out and placed it on the floor. For years, this garage had been ignored. For years, nobody had looked closely enough. And now, Daniel was standing there holding something that might explain everything. But before he could open it, he noticed one thing carved into the metal box. A date. A date from the same year Marcus Vale's company first bought the property. Daniel stared at it, because suddenly, the garage wasn't looking like a bad investment anymore. It was looking like a secret someone had worked very hard to hide. Daniel stared at the metal container sitting on the dusty garage floor. For several minutes, he didn't move. The noise of the outside world disappeared, and all he could hear was the sound of his own thoughts. Why was this hidden? Who put it there? And why did the date match the exact year Marcus Vale's company first owned the property? He had spent days trying to convince himself that buying the garage was a smart decision. But now, for the first time, he felt like he had discovered something much bigger than a simple business opportunity. He grabbed a screwdriver and carefully worked on the old lock. The container was damaged from years of being forgotten, but after several attempts, the lock finally opened. Inside were several documents wrapped in protective material, an old photograph, and a small device that looked like a piece of unfinished technology. Daniel carefully picked up the documents. The first page was covered with technical drawings. The second page had handwritten notes, but the name at the top made him freeze. Vale Innovations, Marcus Vale's company. Daniel sat back in disbelief. The same billionaire who laughed at him. The same man who called the garage worthless. His company's name was hidden inside the walls. Daniel continued reading. The documents described a project from many years ago, a revolutionary design that could improve how certain machines operated, a project that had required millions of dollars in research. But the project had suddenly stopped. There was no explanation, no public announcement, no final report. It simply disappeared. Daniel looked at the old photograph inside the container. It showed a group of engineers standing in front of the same garage. And standing among them was a much younger Marcus Vale. But there was something else. A man standing beside Marcus, holding the same device Daniel had just found. Daniel recognized the expression on everyone's faces. They weren't standing in front of an abandoned building. They were standing in front of something they believed would change the world. The next morning, Daniel began searching for information about the old project. He spent hours reading old business articles and archived reports. Most people had forgotten about it, but one article caught his attention. It mentioned a mysterious failure inside Vale Innovations that caused a promising project to disappear. The article ended with one sentence. Some former employees believed the technology was never destroyed. Daniel leaned back. The garage wasn't worthless. It was forgotten. There was a difference. That realization changed everything. But before Daniel could celebrate, he received another unexpected visit. A man in an expensive suit arrived at the garage. He looked around carefully before speaking. "You're Daniel Carter?" Daniel became cautious. "Yes. Who are you?" The man introduced himself as Victor, a former employee of Marcus Vale. "I heard you found something." Daniel said nothing. Victor looked at the hidden documents on the table. "You don't understand what you're holding." Daniel studied his face. "Then explain it." Victor hesitated. For a moment, he looked nervous. That garage wasn't abandoned because it failed. Daniel waited. It was abandoned because someone wanted people to believe it failed. The words hit Daniel harder than he expected. Victor explained that years ago, a group of engineers created something valuable inside that garage. But after disagreements inside the company, the project disappeared. Some believed Marcus moved on. Others believed he was protecting something. Daniel looked at the documents again. "Why are you telling me this?" Victor looked toward the garage walls. The next day, Daniel decided to investigate the message. He checked the security cameras he installed around the garage. At first, everything looked normal. Then he saw something strange. A person had entered the property late at night. They never went inside. They only stood outside, watching. Daniel paused the video and zoomed in. The person's face was hidden, but they were wearing something familiar. A company jacket. The same company owned by Marcus Vale. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Was Marcus behind this? Or was someone inside Marcus's company acting alone? Before he could find answers, another surprise arrived. A legal representative from Marcus's company came to the garage with official documents. "We believe there may have been an error in the original property transfer," the man said. Daniel looked at the papers. "An error?" The representative nodded. "We would like to review the ownership agreement." Daniel almost laughed. Months ago, nobody cared about this garage. Now, suddenly, everyone wanted to review the paperwork. "You mean you want to take it back?" The man didn't respond. That was enough of an answer. Daniel refused to sign anything. After the representative left, Daniel called Victor, the former employee who had helped him understand the mystery. Victor answered immediately. I was wondering when they would come. Daniel became serious. You knew this would happen? Victor sighed. Anyone who gets close to the truth becomes a problem for them. Daniel looked at the invention designs. Who is them? Victor stayed silent. Then he finally said, people who believed the invention belonged to them. That sentence changed everything. Daniel realized this wasn't just about Marcus. There were more people involved. People who had spent years making sure the truth never came out. Later that evening, Daniel sat with Emma at the dinner table. She noticed something was wrong. Dad, are you okay? Daniel smiled. Yeah, just thinking. She looked at him. About the garage? Daniel nodded. You know, everyone thought I made a mistake buying that place. Emma smiled. But you didn't. Those simple words gave Daniel more strength than any business deal could. He realized he wasn't fighting only for money. He was fighting for the belief that ordinary people could still discover extraordinary things. The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He would stop hiding. He would bring the invention into the open. But before he could reveal anything publicly, he discovered one final piece of evidence inside the garage. Hidden behind the original blueprint was a small recording device. Daniel turned it on. The voice that came through was old, but he recognized it. It was Marcus Vale, a much younger Marcus, and the message began with words that made Daniel freeze. If you are hearing this, it means the garage has finally found someone who deserves the truth. Daniel looked shocked, because Marcus wasn't trying to destroy the invention. He was trying to protect it. But the recording continued, and the next words revealed something Daniel never expected. Marcus had not hidden the garage because the project failed. He hid it because someone powerful inside his own company tried to steal it. And now Daniel was standing in the same position those engineers had been years ago, caught between the truth and the people desperate to keep it buried. Daniel replayed the recording 3 more times. Each time, the same words hit him harder. Marcus Vale wasn't the villain he thought he was. At least, not completely. The billionaire who mocked him at the auction, the man who called the garage worthless, had been hiding a truth that could change everything. But Daniel still had questions. Why did Marcus lie? Why did he let people believe the garage had no value? And why wait until now to reveal the truth? The recording continued. A younger Marcus spoke with a tired voice. I created this company with people I trusted. But when the invention was finished, some of them wanted control. They didn't care who got hurt as long as they owned the future. Daniel listened carefully. The recording explained that Marcus discovered plans to secretly sell the technology to another company. Instead of fighting publicly and destroying years of work, he moved the project away and locked everything inside the garage. But there was one problem. Marcus never expected the garage to end up with someone who would actually uncover everything. He thought it would remain forgotten forever. Daniel sat quietly. For months, he believed he had bought an abandoned building. But he had actually bought a hidden chapter of business history. Then another voice appeared on the recording. A different person. Someone Daniel didn't recognize. The voice said, you can hide the invention, Marcus, but eventually someone will find it. And when they do, they will have to choose between money and doing what is right. The recording ended. Daniel looked at the device. A choice. That was the real reason the garage existed. It wasn't about the invention. It was about who would find it. And now that person was him. The next day, Daniel contacted Marcus and asked him to meet. They sat inside the same garage where everything began. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. No mocking, no laughter. Just 2 people surrounded by a truth that had been hidden for years. You knew someone would find it eventually, Daniel said. Marcus nodded. I hope someone would. Daniel looked confused. Then why did you try to buy it back? Marcus looked down. Because I was afraid. Those words surprised Daniel. A billionaire CEO admitting fear was something almost nobody expected. I built an empire, Marcus continued. But I lost people along the way. The invention became a symbol of everything that went wrong. Daniel studied him. You could have told the world the truth. Marcus shook his head. People would not have listened. They would have only seen my name attached to it. For the first time, Daniel saw Marcus differently. not as a powerful businessman, but as someone who had spent years carrying a heavy secret. However, Daniel still had one concern. If this invention is really valuable, people will fight for it. That's why I needed someone outside my world. Daniel understood. Marcus couldn't reveal the truth because everyone expected him to have an agenda. But Daniel was different. A single father with no powerful connections. Someone people underestimated. Someone nobody saw coming. A few days later, Daniel prepared to present the invention to a group of industry leaders. But the moment the event was announced, pressure arrived again. News outlets started questioning him. Business experts mocked him. People online called him a lucky man who didn't understand what he found. The same pattern was happening again. First they laughed at the garage. Now that they laughed at him. But Daniel remembered the moment he bought the property. He remembered the crowd, the humiliation, the doubts, and he realized something. Every person who changed history was once called foolish before they were proven right. The day of the presentation arrived. Thousands of people watched as Daniel walked onto the stage. Not a billionaire, not a famous inventor, just a single father who refused to give up. Marcus sat in the audience, watching silently. Daniel connected the device. The invention appeared on the screen. The room went quiet. Experts leaned forward. Investors stopped whispering because they finally understood. The garage everyone ignored wasn't empty. It was holding something the world had been waiting for. But just before Daniel revealed the final details, someone from the audience stood up. A former executive from Marcus's company. And he had one claim that could destroy everything Daniel had built. He said the invention didn't belong to Daniel. It belonged to him. The entire room went silent. Hundreds of business leaders, investors, and journalists turned toward the man standing at the back of the audience. His name was Richard Cole, a former executive from Marcus Vail's company. And he wasn't smiling. "I believe there is a misunderstanding," Richard said confidently. The whispers started immediately. For a moment, it felt like the auction all over again. The same judgment, the same doubt, the same people waiting to see him fail. But this time, Daniel wasn't alone. Marcus stood up from his seat. Everyone looked at him. Richard smiled. "Marcus, you know I'm right." But Marcus didn't look at Richard. He looked at Daniel. Then he walked toward the stage. "For years, I stayed silent," Marcus said. The room became even quieter, because I thought protecting the invention meant hiding it. He looked directly at Richard. But I was wrong. Richard's expression changed. Marcus continued. "The invention was never yours." Richard tried to interrupt. "You can't prove that." Marcus nodded. "That's why I kept the original records." The screen behind Daniel changed. A set of old documents appeared. Original designs, research notes, ownership records, and signatures from the engineers who created the technology. The room watched as the truth unfolded. Richard's confidence started disappearing. Daniel looked at the screen in disbelief. Everything Marcus had hidden for years was finally being revealed. The invention wasn't stolen. It wasn't lost. It was protected. And now the world finally understood why the garage had mattered. The CEO who once called it worthless had been protecting something priceless. The audience turned back toward Daniel. The same people who laughed at him months earlier were now standing and listening carefully. A business expert in the front row shook his head. "I can't believe this was sitting inside an abandoned garage." Daniel smiled slightly. Neither could he. After the presentation, investors surrounded Daniel. Everyone wanted to know what his plans were. Offers came from companies around the world. But Daniel wasn't thinking about money. He was thinking about the moment he bought the garage. The moment everyone told him he was making the biggest mistake of his life. A reporter approached him. "Daniel, many people say you became successful because you found something valuable. Do you agree?" Daniel looked back toward Marcus. Then he answered, "I think the value was always there. The difference was that someone finally believed enough to look." The word spread everywhere. Within days, the story became one of the biggest business stories in the world. A single father, a forgotten garage, a hidden invention, and a billionaire who underestimated the person who discovered it. But the biggest surprise came from Marcus. Instead of taking full control of the invention, he announced that Daniel would lead the project. Everyone was shocked. A billionaire handing such an opportunity to someone with no corporate background seemed impossible. But Marcus explained his decision. Sometimes the person who finds the opportunity is the person who understands its value the most. Months passed. The old garage was transformed. The broken walls were replaced. The abandoned space became a center for innovation. And every time Daniel walked inside, he remembered what it used to be. A place nobody wanted, a place everyone ignored, a place people laughed at. But there was still one final surprise waiting. One evening, Daniel received a package at the garage. No sender name. Inside was an old photograph. It showed the original engineers standing in front of the garage years ago. But written on the back was a message. "Thank you for finishing what we started." Daniel stared at the words, because he realized something. The garage wasn't just a hidden business opportunity. It was a story waiting for the right person. And somehow, against all odds, that person had been him. But the message had one more line. A line that made Daniel wonder if the garage's biggest secret had even been discovered yet. Daniel read the final line written on the back of the photograph. "There's always another door for those brave enough to open the first one." He looked around the garage. The same place where people once saw nothing but broken walls and forgotten memories had now become a symbol of possibility. But those words stayed in his mind. Another door, another secret, another opportunity. For months, Daniel had been focused on proving the value of the invention. He had worked with experts, faced powerful opponents, and stood in front of the world to defend something everyone thought was worthless. But he never stopped to ask why the garage was chosen. Why this place? Why did the original engineers leave everything here? And why did Marcus allow a random buyer to purchase it at auction? That question brought him back to the beginning. The day everyone laughed. The day he raised his hand with only $1,000. The day Marcus looked at him like he was making a foolish mistake. Daniel decided to ask Marcus directly. They met inside the garage one final time. Marcus walked through the building slowly, looking at the restored walls and the technology that had once been hidden. "It looks different now," Marcus said. Daniel smiled. "Because people finally see what was always here." Marcus nodded. Then Daniel asked the question he had carried for months. "Why did you let this place go to auction?" Marcus became quiet. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he answered, "Because I was waiting." Daniel looked confused. "Waiting for what?" Marcus looked around the garage. "For someone who needed the opportunity more than I needed the money." Daniel didn't expect that answer. Marcus explained that over the years, many wealthy investors had shown interest in the property. They wanted to buy it because of rumors, connections, and possible profits. But Marcus never accepted their offers. He waited, because he believed the person who discovered the truth shouldn't be someone chasing power. They should be someone who understood struggle. Someone who knew what it felt like to have nothing. Someone who would use the opportunity for something bigger. Daniel finally understood. The garage was never a test of intelligence. It was a test of character. The world looked at the building and saw a bad investment. Daniel looked at it and saw a chance. That difference changed everything. A year after the auction, Daniel's life looked completely different. The invention became successful. The company expanded. And the man who once struggled to pay bills was now creating opportunities for others. But the biggest change wasn't the money. It was the people he helped. Daniel created programs for struggling parents and young inventors who had ideas but no resources. He wanted others to have the chance he almost missed, because he knew what it felt like to be judged before anyone understood your story. One afternoon, Emma walked through the garage with him. She looked at the place where her father had spent countless hours working. "Do you remember when everyone said this place was useless?" Daniel smiled. "Yes. And now?" Daniel looked at the busy workers, the new technology, and the future being built around them. Now they know they were wrong. Emma smiled. "But you knew." Daniel shook his head. "No, I just believed there was something worth finding." Years later, the story of the $1,000 garage became something people told around the world. A reminder that value is not always obvious. That success does not always begin in a perfect office. Sometimes it begins in a forgotten place. Sometimes it begins with one person willing to believe. And sometimes the biggest opportunities are hidden exactly where everyone else stopped looking. The billionaire CEO who once called the garage worthless eventually admitted something publicly. He said, "The best investment I ever made was not buying that property." People expected him to mention the invention, the company, the billions created afterward. But Marcus surprised everyone. He said, "The best investment was believing that the right person would eventually find it." Daniel never forgot the old garage, because it wasn't just the place where he discovered a hidden invention. It was the place where he discovered himself. The single father everyone underestimated became the person everyone remembered. And the garage that nobody wanted for $1,000 became proof of one simple truth. Sometimes the world doesn't see your value at first, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. Years had passed since the day Daniel Carter bought the forgotten garage for $1,000. The story had become famous around the world, but Daniel never allowed the success to change the way he saw things. To everyone else, the garage was a symbol of a business miracle. To Daniel, it was a reminder of the day people laughed at him, a reminder of the moment he almost doubted himself, a reminder that the biggest opportunities sometimes come disguised as the biggest mistakes. The garage was no longer abandoned. It had become a place where young inventors, struggling entrepreneurs, and people with impossible ideas came to work. Daniel wanted the place to represent something bigger than money. He wanted it to represent hope. One afternoon, while walking through the original section of the garage, Daniel noticed an old wooden cabinet that had never been removed. It was the only thing left from the original building. For years, everyone had focused on the invention, the documents, and the technology. Nobody had looked inside. Daniel smiled. It reminded him of the first day, the day he discovered the hidden container, the day everything changed. He opened the cabinet carefully. Inside was a small notebook. The pages were old, but the writing was clear. It belonged to one of the original engineers. Daniel started reading. The notebook wasn't about technology. It wasn't about money. It was about failure. The engineer wrote about how many people rejected their ideas before anyone believed in them. They wrote about investors who laughed, companies that refused, people who said the project would never work. Then Daniel reached the final page. There was a message. If you found this notebook, you already understand the most important lesson. The invention was never the greatest achievement. The greatest achievement was continuing when everyone else said stop. Daniel closed the notebook. For years, people had focused on the garage's hidden value. But the real treasure was never the technology. It was the lesson behind it. That night, Daniel invited Marcus to the garage one final time. The two men stood together in the same place where their story had started. Marcus looked around. "I never imagined this place would become this." Daniel smiled. "Neither did I." Marcus laughed. "You know, when I first saw you at the auction, I thought you were making the worst decision of your life." Daniel looked at him. "And now?" Marcus looked at the garage. "Now I think you were the only person who understood what was happening." They stood silently for a moment. Two people from completely different worlds. One a billionaire. One a single father who had once struggled to survive. But both connected by the same place. The garage. A few months later, Daniel received an invitation to speak at a global business event. Thousands of people attended. Executives, investors, young dreamers. When Daniel walked onto the stage, the audience expected a speech about success. Instead, he told the truth. "I didn't buy a valuable garage." The audience listened. "I bought something everyone else had already given up on." He explained that the real difference wasn't money. It wasn't connections. It wasn't being the smartest person in the room. It was being willing to look closer when everyone else walked away. The speech became one of the most talked about moments of the event. Because people didn't connect with the invention. They connected with the struggle, the doubt. The moment when Daniel had every reason to quit, but chose not to. Years later, whenever someone asked Daniel about the garage, he always gave the same answer. They called it worthless because they only saw what was outside. And what was inside? Daniel would smile. Possibility. The old garage remained standing, not because it was the most expensive building, not because it created the biggest company, but because it proved something people often forget. A person's value, an idea's value, and an opportunity's value are not always visible in the beginning. Sometimes the world needs time to understand what one person already believes. And sometimes the person everyone underestimates becomes the person who changes everything.